Saludos, welcome to Tambora Dialogue, a podcast that honors our rich Latina history, jumps a call to join together in celebration of our collective culture, and serves as a call to action to renativize ourselves by decolonizing all aspects of our lives. We at Tambora Dialogue believe, as the Chinese proverb says, that to forget one's ancestors is to be a book without a source, a tree without a root. Therefore, to remind us of our rich history and our collective power as a people, we have invited Vicente Panama Alba, a member of the Young Lords, to talk with us about the enduring legacy of the Young Lords Party, whose revolutionary ideologies and movement continue to resonate today and inform a new generation of changemakers fighting for our community. Vicente, thank you for joining the Drum Circle today.
My pleasure.
Fabulous. So, for many of us that are activists in one way or another, the Black Panthers and the Young Lords are legendary and remain touchstones for those of us building a framework of revolution and change. However, because of the black and brown erasure that often happens within, the educational system in the United States, many in our communities are still unfamiliar with both movements. So can you share with us why these two parties are important to the work that is happening today?
Okay, I think that it's important for people to understand where we come from, okay? When the Black Panther Party and the Young Lords were formed, we were living a very traumatic existence as communities, okay? For me, personally, my first instinct was to join the Black Panther Party. And the reason why I wanted to join the Black Panther Party is because they were fighting back. I was a very angry young man. And then I was watching the news and I saw a newscast of a takeover of the church by a group known as the Young Lords. And, I had heard about the Young Lords before the garbage offensive, but the newscast really impacted me because I said to myself, for the first time, we mestizos, we Latinos, Hispanics, however people want to identify themselves, are part of this revolutionary movement. Okay, and that was, to me, very inspirational. Like I said, I was a very angry young man, and what I wanted to do was fight. Okay, there's many things I didn't understand. There are many things that I learned in becoming a Young Lord. It's a quote about Che Guevara, Ernesto Che Guevara, that says that he said, true revolutionaries are guided by deep feelings of love. When I joined the Young Lords, it wasn't about love, it was about anger. And one of the many things I learned in the Young Lords was to love my people. If you really want to fight, you have to be guided, you have to be motivated by love for the people. That means that you have to educate yourself for the people. You have to be willing to fight for your people. You have to be willing to go to jail for your people. You have to be willing to die for your people because you love them, not because you're angry. And that changes the perspective of what I did, what we did, and what I believe people need to do. Fight guided by love.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, that, Vicente, is so powerful. And, you know, I did a lot of my learning about the Black Panthers and the Young Lords on my own, right? Because as I said at the beginning, we weren't taught that history in the school system at all. And, you know, as an Afro-Latina, I have always been very impressed by how inclusive the Young Lords were. You know, although it was primarily, you know, Puerto Rican, the Young Lords, you know, y'all actively recruited other Latinx people as well as African Americans. And, you know, that to me is an indication of love. Like, you love your people, you love your history, you love your roots. And so can you share with us, like, how did you all go about recruiting such a diverse membership? What did that look like back then?
Okay, let me start by explaining something.
Yeah.
I'm not Puerto Rican. I'm Panamanian.
Oh, no, okay. I know that. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, and that's the reason they call me Panama. And understand this. I immigrated to the city of New York in 1961. And contrary to the projections today, New York City was not very inclusive. Okay, there was a lot of segregation. There was a lot of racism. And I didn't understand it because I immigrated from Panama up, and what I had been told about where I was going was this great place of equality and democracy and liberty and all of this stuff that really wasn't true. I think that I had an experience at a very young age in New York that really brought out my anger. I was about 11, 12 years old. I didn't even speak English. And I was hanging out in the summer with kids my age. All were Puerto Ricans except me. That's what they call me, Panama, you know, right. Because there was 1 million Puerto Ricans in the city of New York. Anyway, we were hanging out in the street near my house, and the police came. And they have what they call the TPF, Tactical Police Force. There was the riot squads. There were these big, huge white boys that were in the police, and they were used to quash riots. And when they weren't quashing riots, they would patrol Black and Puerto Rican communities. And they came into the block, and they grabbed about 20 of us, and they brought us into a backyard. And they started whipping the shit out of us. Okay. Back then, cops carry two things you don't see very much now. They used to carry something called a blackjack, which was a steel ball wrapped in leather. And they also carry pieces of hoses that they hung from their pistols. And they would whip people with that. They would hit people with that. And they used the rubber hoses because they hit you, they bust you up inside, but they don't leave marks outside. In any case, they took us into a backyard and they started whipping the crap out of us. And the cop that had me just kept yelling at me, "You fucking dirty Puerto Rican," and kept hitting me. And, you know, I didn't understand. So I'm trying to get out of an ass whipping, and I tell him, "Officer, not Puerto Rican, Panamanian." And he tells me, "I don't give a fuck what kind of Puerto Rican you are." And he kept hitting me. And so I guess that day he nationalized me Puerto Rican. I consider myself a Puerto Rican today. But that was an experience that generated a lot of anger in me. The other thing I think it's important to know about the Young Lords is that the way the Young Lords started in New York City was because of a group of Puerto Rican students that they were like the first generation of Puerto Ricans going to college. And they went to a university called Old Westbury in Long Island.
Yeah, I'm familiar.
Yeah, and they started a student group called the Don Pedro Albizu Campos Society. And the purpose of that group was to research history about Puerto Ricans, because in the educational system, the way the things they taught, we didn't exist. We had no history. We were nothing. Okay, so they started doing research as a student group, and among other things, they were reading the Black Panther Party newspaper. And in the Black Panther Party newspaper, they read about a group called the Young Lords in Chicago that the Black Panther Party have been working with. There was a group of Puerto Ricans and Mexicans. They were formerly a street gang in Chicago that had become politicized and had joined the Rainbow Coalition that the Black Panther Party, led by Fred Hampton, organized in Chicago. And they went to Chicago, met with the Young Lords, and then came back to New York City and started the Young Lords in New York.
Right.
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
you hear me? Okay. Okay. So anyway, that's how the organization started in New York City. It originated from Chicago. And in New York, they started on July 26, 1969. They had a rally in Tompkins Square Park. And they came together and they were trying to figure out what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And different people had different opinions. You know, some people said, no, we have to, organize the students and the high schools and the colleges. Other people were saying, no, the important thing is police brutality. And someone said, wait a minute. Why don't we talk to the people in the community and ask them what's important to them?
Mm-hmm.
And the response in El Barrio, in East Harlem, was unanimous. La basura, the garbage.
Okay.
I need to understand the conditions back then. El Barrio was overwhelmingly tenements, 5, 6, 7-story buildings with 4, 5, 7 apartments in each floor, people living on top of one another. And the Department of Sanitation would rarely pick up the garbage. In the summertime, that was a major problem. The stench of rotting garbage, the vermin, the roaches, the rats, and the garbage wouldn't get picked up. And since that was what was important to the people, that's how the Young Lords, that was the first action the Young Lords took in El Barrio. They started what was called the garbage offensive. Since they wouldn't pick up the garbage, people started taking the garbage and placing it in the middle of the streets, blocking traffic. Now, back then, El Barrio was the route by which buses took people to work from uptown the Bronx, from the white communities down to downtown Manhattan. And when you block the streets, then they begin to react. So people started throwing the garbage in the streets, setting them on fire, and that was the first offensive. And I think it's important to mention it because it is about listening to the people, what's important to the people, what they care about. Okay?
That's right.
The struggle continued because we had a major health problem in our community. Okay? You had a public hospital system, and, you know, in New York, the Health Hospitals Corporation, the hospitals didn't have any translators. People went to the hospital but couldn't have a conversation with a medical person, a doctor, or a nurse, to tell them what was wrong with them. Mm-hmm. See, and that created very serious problems. There was an epidemic of tuberculosis in our community. People weren't being tested. There was a truck, an X-ray truck, and the Department of Health would park the truck down on Pleasant Avenue in the white community. Nobody used it. So some young lords went and stole the truck and asked the people on staff if they would join them. They were going to move the truck from Pleasant Avenue down to in front of the Young Lord's office on Madison Avenue. And they did that, and hundreds of people lined up to get x-rayed because we had a tuberculosis epidemic.
Right.
So there was another health action that the Young Lords took.
Yeah, I mean,
then
it's
something. I'm sorry?
No, I was going to say that, you know, it's very obvious that you all took on, you know, the issues that were affecting the community at the time. You know, one was the garbage pickup, right? And so demanding that sanitation department picked up the garbage and setting it on fire so that people took notice, right, which led to the change, right, and to actual garbage pickup. And then, you know, taking over the X-ray truck, demonstrating again that there was a specific need that wasn't being addressed in the community at the time, because as you said, there was a lot of tuberculosis. So you all had an agenda, but it wasn't an agenda that, you know, just fell from the sky. It was an agenda that was, you know, designed by the specific needs of the people in the community.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The other thing that was happening is that a lot of the Puerto Rican community was moving to the South Bronx. And in the South Bronx, the same health problems existed. Mm-hmm. The only public hospital at that time was Lincoln Hospital. Lincoln Hospital was located on 141st Street on Bruckner Boulevard. And it was a hospital that had been built in the 1800s to receive slaves coming from the south of the United States that were moving north. It was a discombobulated building, atrocious. And the Lincoln Hospital had an arrangement with the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. Albert Einstein College of Medicine used Lincoln Hospital as a training facility for doctors. So they would send doctors, inexperienced, to come and treat the people in Lincoln Hospital. They didn't speak Spanish. They didn't care. They were there to learn. We were the guinea pigs. And one of the things that happened was that there was a woman named Carmen Rodriguez who was given an operation and put on a gurney in a hallway, and she bled to death. Nobody paid any attention. She bled to death. And when that happened, the Young Lords took over Lincoln Hospital for the first time.
Yeah. Now,
that was... sorry?
Yeah. No, yeah. No, I was going to, you know, there are lots of people that, you know, that think that the takeover of Lincoln Hospital was a spontaneous act, but it was actually something that you all had been planning for some time, right? Very, very methodically. And so then it was, right?
Yeah, well, it was a response to a crisis.
Right.
Young Lords and Black Panthers had been going to the hospital and demanding people to be treated with dignity and respect, demanding that people provide translators so people could actually tell the medical workers what was wrong with them. And that wasn't happening. The death of Carmen Rodriguez brought about the takeover. The takeover was short-lived. It was a matter of hours.
Right.
People that worked in the hospital actually supported the takeover and gave the Young Lords white robes, you know, the doctors use, and that's how the Young Lords got out of the hospital without being arrested. Okay. One of the things that was found out during that takeover was that Lincoln Hospital had been provided with money to establish a drug treatment program. Now, I think it's very important for people to understand this. Back then, it was estimated that 15% of the population of the South Bronx was addicted to heroin.
Wow.
Heroin addiction was an epidemic in the community, and there was no treatment for the people in that community. So, on November 10th, 1970, we took over the nurses' residence of Lincoln Hospital to establish a drug treatment program. And it was a very important action, and I'll tell you why. Personally, I was using drugs. Okay. By mere coincidence, I had met a sister from the Black Panther Party named Cleo Silvers, who I loved forever. And, you know, every time I walked the streets by her house, she would call me over and talk to me and tell me, yo, you got to stop using drugs. And, you know, and then she gave me her phone number. She says, look, the day that you decide to stop using drugs, give me a call. By mere coincidence, I called her on November the 9th and told her that I was getting off of drugs. I was going through my changes because I was addicted to drugs, but I wanted to be a revolutionary.
Yeah.
But I couldn't be a revolutionary if I was a slave to drugs. Okay? So I finally made the decision. I called Cleo, and she tells me, look, to go to this place tonight. It was the mess hall of the Puerto Rican Student Union. They're going to be waiting for you there. And tomorrow morning, you go to the Puerto Rican Student Union office, and they're going to bring you to me. I did that. It happened that next morning was the second takeover of Lincoln Hospital, the nurses' residence building, and the substance abuse program was established. Yeah. We got the support of the staff. Back then, there were a lot of radical and progressive doctors that, you know, they belonged to various revolutionary organizations, anti-war organizations, and they provided the methadone that we used at first to detoxify people. Now, understand this. There's a takeover. People start hearing about it. By the end of the first day, there were like 100 people that wanted to sign up to get detoxified.
Wow.
By the next morning, there were a couple of hundred people lined up wanting to be admitted to the detox program because addiction was an epidemic.
Right.
This takeover resulted in what is known as the Lincoln Detox. The program lasted about 8 years, long after the Young Lords were dismantled.
That's incredible.
I worked at the Lincoln Detox, and I became a counselor there. I worked with prisoners, people that got arrested for drugs. I went to court for them. I went to visit them in jail, try to get them released to our program. Our program was an outpatient program. One of the, I think, very important contributions that program made was the introduction of acupuncture as a mode of treatment for addiction. And that happened we read in a paper, in a newspaper, that there was an acupuncturist in Thailand who was treating someone with respiratory problems. And it turned out that that person was addicted to opium. And he found that by stimulating the lung point in the ear, it alleviated the withdrawal from opium. We read about this. We went down to Chinatown. We bought an ear chart. We bought acupuncture needles. And we began training ourselves with each other. With, with needles, take each other, trying to learn the meridians. And that became very important. Mm-hmm. I'll tell you to what extent. Around that time, Richard Nixon, the former president, when he was president, opened up relations with China. And all of a sudden, acupuncture got a lot more exposure in the mainstream media. And we were the only place within a hospital, a medical facility, treating people with acupuncture. So they became very interested. We sent 12 people from Lincoln Detox to Canada to an institute that taught acupuncture, and they came back certified acupuncture doctors. Amongst them is a brother you may or may not know by the name of Mutulu Shakur. He is a political prisoner who right now is dying in prison, and we're trying to get him released. Anyway, so the program started out all voluntarily. We knew that they had funds, and eventually they had to release the funds to pay the volunteers and make them staff. And that's how the Lincoln Detox was created. The program lasted until 1978, when Mayor Koch, then the mayor of the city of New York, ordered the detox program to be closed down. And the way he did it was that they had a list of the staff and what political affiliations we had, who have been Young Lords, who have been Black Panthers, who have been members of the Republic of New Africa, and we were banned from entering Lincoln Hospital.
Even So even though the Mayor Koch knew that it was actually working, that the program was actually working and helping people, he still wanted to shut it down?
He shut it down, yeah. The only thing they kept was the acupuncture clinic, because that's where they saw the money coming in.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's important for our listeners to know that, how were you providing these services? Were you charging people for these services?
No.
Exactly. It was all free.
Everything was free. In fact, when we took over the nurses' residence, we started demanding that the volunteers and the patients get fed for free at the hospital. Mm-hmm. Okay? Nobody was charged. We operated that way for 8 years until... it's important to note, in that process, they built the new Lincoln Hospital.
Yeah.
And the old Lincoln Hospital was shut down. When the hospital was shut down, the only institution within the hospital that was left at the old Lincoln Hospital was the detox program. Okay, they moved everything else to the new hospital. We had to go and fight to get into the new hospital. that's from which we eventually were shut down.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that folks may also not know is that, you know, your Young Lords pressuring the city, because obviously the Lincoln Hospital also, you know, had, you know, when it was built, it was so old that it had lead in the walls, right? There was lead paint, which also caused a lot of people to even get sicker, right? Patients, doctors,
Absolutely.
everybody. Yeah, and so you all, you know, really pressured the city to develop basically the Bureau of Lead Poisoning in the 70s, which is also incredible, right? But, you know, the Young Lords don't get credited for that, and you should.
Yeah, there's two things I think are important to know. While the hospital was taken over, an organization of Black and Latino health workers was created, called the Health Revolutionary Unity Movement.
Mm-hmm.
And they worked with the Young Lords, and we went out, Young Lords, atrium members, on Saturdays into the community to do free lead testing, to do free TB testing. Okay, it was, in fact, if I may share a personal story. Okay.
Of course.
I had no idea what machismo, male chauvinism was. Okay, I'm a young man growing up in the streets of the Bronx. So the first day that I went out to do testing on a Saturday, you know, I was drug-free, I was happy, and my attitude was, hey, mommy, ven pa' acá, hey, baby. And there was this sister from Ashram, and she didn't say anything to me all day long. When we went back to the Ashram office to put the equipment away, she grabs me and she tells me, dude, you know, you are a male chauvinist pig.
Mm.
And like I said, I didn't know what male chauvinism was.
Right.
But I was really upset because she called me a pig. Okay. So I come out of my mouth, what are you talking about, baby? And she said, that, it's precisely that.
Yeah.
And that for me was one of many life-changing moments. Because I began to understand how men oppress women.
Yeah.
How we look at women as sexual objects and not give women the respect that women are due. The other thing that I think is important is that in the Young Lords, we had gay members.
Yeah.
Both men and women that were gay. And so within the organization, we were being challenged to eradicate all our old ways, because you cannot be about liberation and be oppressing other people.
That's right. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
And it was about the attitudes towards gay people. It was the attitude towards women. It was the attitude around race. Because we as a people are ingrained with these racist, sexist values.
That's right.
And
yeah.
part of being a revolutionary was struggling to eradicate those attitudes from within us, both as individuals and as an organization.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Panama, that, you know, I've always been very impressed with all that you all have achieved, and I always have valued just how intersectional the Young Lords were. And, you know, there was so much going on in the world then, and similar to what we are all in right now, that, you know, it's like it's important for the Young Lords to take a stance on society, social matters. And hearing you talk right now, I started to think about, you know, how you all created the 13-point program and platform. And so I was hoping that you can maybe, you know, tell our listeners a little bit about that platform, which you started to tell us.
Okay. Repeat the question again. Hold on a second. Oh, 1 second.
Sure.
Hi. I got 4 dogs, and they're going wild.
That's quite all right. I have 2 kids that are not going wild right now, but it'll come later. so no worries. So yeah, no, I was wondering if, you know, I was saying that the work that you all did and everything from the infrastructure of the movement, of the party, the work that you all did was very intersectional, very inclusive. And, you know, that is what led to the creation of the 13-point program and platform. So I'm wondering if you can just share a little bit about that.
Well, you know, I think it's important to understand that we in the Young Lords learned from the teachings of Mao Zedong.
Yeah.
We read about criticism and self-criticism, and we utilize self-criticism and self-criticism. We learned about combat individualism, because this is not about the individual. This is about the collective, about the people.
That's right.
So we utilize these tools to challenge ourselves and each other about the work we did and how to do it better and how to treat people better.
Mm-hmm.
How to look at our people in a different way, how to understand our people. You don't change people by being confrontational. You change people by being respectful. You talk with people. You don't talk to people.
Yeah.
You hear people out. That's how, go back to the example of the garbage offensive. You listen to the people.
Yeah.
They may not be revolutionaries. They may not believe all your principles, but they understand a lot of things that we don't. And they teach us. And we share. And we teach each other. And that's how you go about building a revolutionary movement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's about what you said at the beginning, right? It's about love, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Love and appreciating your people, love and appreciating your community, listening to them, understanding that, this work, just our society in general, whether it's the work or not, it's like we're in it together. right? It's a collective. Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. We completely agree with you.
Yeah, and we learned how are the ways that we can positively impact people.
Yeah.
Okay. People in El Barrio were not revolutionaries when Young Lord started. But people loved the fact that there was an organization willing to fight for their rights.
Yeah.
People in the South Bronx loved the fact that we were fighting for the health care.
Yeah.
See, and there's something else that I think is important to mention. We engaged in a lot of reform struggles, but we were not reformists. Okay, we were not about reforming society. We were about revolutionizing society. See, we engaged in struggles. We engaged in struggles against landlords for the tenants. We engaged in struggles for the rights of people in welfare centers. We engaged in struggle in the hospitals, in the workplaces. But it was not to reform. The reform struggles were used to bring people closer to revolutionary thinking. Because, see, we can continue to struggle for reforms forever.
Right.
And we're going to continue to have issues to struggle. We need to change society from the top down. And that only comes about through revolution.
That's right. That's right. Panama, we know that in addition to, the Lincoln Hospital takeover, you were also one of the main organizers of the Statue of Liberty takeover. Can you tell us what were the issues that you were attempting to address, and what were the specific changes that you were going for?
Okay. I left the Young Lords and continued to do revolutionary work. And we formed in New York City the Committee to Free the Nationalist Prisoners. The Nationalist prisoners were members of the Nationalist Party of Puerto Rico that had risen and taken up arms for the liberation of Puerto Rico. And there were, in the United States, 5 political prisoners that had been in jail since 1950 and 54. And people said that we were crazy, that those people would never be let out of jail, and we wanted them free. Okay. So we started a campaign in the community, the Committee to Free the Nationalists, to raise consciousness in the community about these 5 people.
Yeah.
Lolita Lebrón, Blanca León, Rafael Cancel Miranda, Irving Flores, Carcollazo. They were imprisoned. In fact, Carcollazo had been sentenced to death. And his death sentence was revoked to life in prison. And amongst the people that marched in that campaign was Fidel Castro. Before he went to Cuba to make the Cuban Revolution. He marched for the freedom of Oscar Lopez.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm sorry. Another political prisoner. So we had this campaign going, and we have been mobilizing marches to Washington every year, demanding their release. And then things changed because in 1977, another organization rose, the FALN, Fuerzas Armadas de Liberación Nacional, and they were a clandestine organization, and they were doing armed propaganda. They were putting bombs in corporation offices and U.S. government offices, demanding the freedom of the nationalists and the independence of Puerto Rico. And that created a different reality to work with, because many people who wanted to support the nationalists, they didn't want to be identified as terrorists. And according to the government, the FALN was a terrorist organization.
Yeah.
In fact, I don't know if you know this, I was the first person arrested in New York City accused of being a member of the FALN. But that's another story.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so what happened was that we were mobilizing to Washington. It was like the third or fourth year. And it became difficult. People were not responding the same way.
Yeah.
People were saying, yo, we go to Washington every year and nothing's happening. Nothing is going to happen. Okay? These political prisoners are going to die in jail. And we met in the committee. 3 people met in the committee. Richie Perez, Mickey Melendez, and I, to talk about trying to figure out what to do next. And we kept hearing people say, you know, there has to be some militant action, but not involving bombs.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? But something militant has to happen. So we met and we decided to take over the Statue of Liberty. And the way that was carried out was that for security reasons, the only people that knew the plan was Richie, Mickey, and I. We went as individuals to do reconnaissance at the Statue of Liberty to see how the security was, how they operated, when they opened up, when they closed down, learn everything we could. I did it, Mickey did it, Richie did it. Then we met. We would meet in different places after all our regular meetings were done. So nobody knew we were meeting. And we would meet in a bar, in a restaurant, different places all the time. And we planned the takeover of the Statue of Liberty. It was a very, very interesting day. For starters, I was banned from being arrested because I was out on bail.
Yeah.
I'm accused of being a member of the FALN. So we had all these arguments. I would say, no, I'm going in, I don't give a shit. And at the same Panama, you get locked up again. They're not going to let you out. Okay? So Richie and Mickey let the actual take over. The way we did it was that we recruited individuals that we knew and trusted to find out whether they'd be willing to get arrested for the nationalists without knowing what or where they were going to be arrested.
Yeah.
So each one of us identified people that we trusted. We checked with each other, make sure that everybody else trusted the same people, and then we divided the people up. And we went and we met with each individual separately. We never spoke on the phones. Okay, they assumed that phones are tapped, so you couldn't talk about anything on the phones. People around us didn't know we were meeting. Okay? And on the day of the takeover, Richie met with a group of people in one part of New York City. I met with another group of people in a different part of New York City. And Mickey met with another group of people in another part of the city. And we got on the subway and took them to Battery Park to take the ferry to the Statue of Liberty. That's when they realized where they were going. Now, everybody else went to the Statue of Liberty except myself.
Yeah.
Diana Perez Caballero and Cesar Torres. The three of us stood on Battery Park to be the spokespersons for the people that took over the statue. You got to remember that back then there were no cell phones.
Right.
Okay, so I needed to, in our travels into the Statue of Liberty, into Battery Park, identify the public phones. At that time, there were a lot of public phones. Get the telephone numbers so that we could communicate between the people in the statue and those of us outside. Mm-hmm. The takeover happened. The way it happened was that people got on the first ferry, and when the ferry landed, they ran to the statue to prevent people from getting in. So the only people that were in the statue were the guards. So the guards were subdued and thrown out, and the place was locked up. We thought.
How many people were involved in that?
There were in the actual inside the statue there were, if I remember correctly, 31.
31. Okay.
Yeah. And we thought, that we needed to hold the statue long enough to get El Diario La Prensa to come and cover the takeover. Mm-hmm. Okay? But what happened was, it was a really interesting day. What happened was that the statue gets taken over, and the police start fighting among themselves about who has jurisdiction.
Interesting.
Whether it's NYPD, whether it's the New York State Troopers, whether it's the Terrorist Task Force, whether it's the FBI, whether it's the federal Fox police. So they start struggling with who's going to take charge, and hours begin to pass. Okay? So what we thought was going to be a takeover that would last an hour lasted many hours. Okay? In fact, it lasted so long that we had made no preparations for people to eat,
right.
people, to have water, to have cigarettes, none of that. And the hours dragged on. And it was funny because I was the person in charge in Battery Park, and I called the person that dealt with all our funds, the money that we had for the campaign. I told them, take all the money out, okay? And I need for you to go to the supermarket, get some bread, cold cuts, things to drink, cigarettes, blah, blah, blah. And I got somebody else to look about renting a helicopter. So we were going to drop bags with food that on the ledge of the Statue of Liberty with a helicopter. And interestingly enough, it was Felipe Luciano, who was then a reporter, who came to me and told me, Panama, they just banned all flights from around the Statue of Liberty, I think 10,000 feet or whatever. So we could never drop the food off. Okay?
Right.
But they kept arguing. I kept arguing, and it lasted into the late afternoon. Meanwhile, it was pandemonium in Battery Park because, reporters came. They wanted to know what was going on. They disconnected the phones on the island so we couldn't talk to the people inside. And then these right-wingers came. I remember thinking one guy's name was Barry Farber, who came, who said he wanted to be traded for the hostages. I kept saying, there are no hostages.
There are no hostages.
Okay. No, you have hostages. I don't want to be traded for them. I don't want to go to the island. And there was all this drama. I mean, it was, and one of the interesting things is that because the takeover lasted so long, while we thought that we just had to hold it long enough for El Diario La Prensa, the Spanish paper, to cover it, because they would never cover anything about independence in Puerto Rico or the nationalists, reporters came from, and this was front page story around the world.
Yeah.
In the coming days, we got newspaper clippings mailed to us from Holland, from Paris, France, from everywhere, Australia. It had been front page story around the world. And that's the story of Statue of Liberty.
Wow. Yeah, I remember coming across, like when I was learning about, about you and the Young Lords, coming across an article that was in French, and I was like, what is this? And then that's where I learned about the Statue of Liberty takeover. So yeah, it was definitely international news. I know that more recently you are considered to be one of the co-founders of the Justice Committee, along with Richie Perez.
Right.
And right. Yeah. So what changes are you calling for through this work with the Justice Committee? I know that it focuses on law enforcement and police brutality, but there's so much more that you all are doing. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Let me start by saying this. In 1970, you weren't even born. 1970, the Young Lords called the Puerto Rican to a mobilization at the United Nations. I believe it was October 30th, 1970. And over 10,000 people marched from El Barrio to the United Nations. Mm-hmm. Back then, we had three demands: independence for Puerto Rico, the freedom of the nationalist prisoners, and the end to police brutality. I bring this up because I think, so I have the perception that many people think that this issue of police violence and murders is something new. Right? Our community has been fighting this all our lives. Police, law enforcement violence and murder is in existence in the United States since the United States was colonies. Yeah. Violence against the indigenous, violence against slaves, mm-hmm. murders, okay, just carried out by law enforcement. Yeah. Okay. So it's a part of the culture of law enforcement, racial violence by law enforcement. I say this to give a background, okay? Like I said, in 1970 was one of our three demands. We formed something after the Young Lords broke up called the National Congress for Puerto Rican Rights. And we formed a chapter in New York City, of which Richie Perez and I were members. Mm-hmm. And in New York, there were struggles against police violence and murders. But no one ever talked about the murders of Puerto Ricans. It was projected as something between the police and the black community. So we formed the Justice Committee in order to address the police violence in our community. I think many people know about the case of Anthony Baez. It was a case that generated a lot of mobilizations in the Bronx, in New York. He was a Puerto Rican young man who actually wanted to be a cop in Florida that came to New York to visit his mother and his father for Christmas. And he was playing football outside his house, throwing the football around. And he threw the football as a patrol car was driving into his block. And the football hit the patrol car. And this guy named, Lieutenant Francis Labode came out of the car, took the nightstick, and choked them to death. Mm-hmm. And that case became very big in New York. Eventually, Anthony Labode went to jail, I think, for 7 years for not in the state court system, but the feds indicted him for violation of civil rights. And I think he spent 7 years in jail. That case is widely known. It was led by the Justice Committee. But even before that, there was a case of Luis Baez, a Puerto Rican, lived in Brooklyn. He had mental health problems. His mother called the police for him to be taken to a hospital, and he was shot to death. Yeah. And that was a big mobilization in Brooklyn that the media totally ignored. Okay. We had a demonstration in Brooklyn with thousands of people. And the police came and drove the cars straight into the demonstration. It was horrible. Anyway, and the media that was there, they never published anything about that. And no cop was ever indicted or anything. Anyway, that's the background of the Justice Committee.
Yeah.
The Justice Committee basically works to support the families of victims of police violence and murders. So, for example, we work with Miss Baez, the mother of Anthony Baez. We work with Miss Rosario, the mother of Anthony Rosario, which was another case that was never solved. The cop shot this kid to death in an apartment. He was lured there because he had a girlfriend, I think was an immigrant. And there was a guy that had taken money from her, supposedly straightened out his immigration problem, and then didn't do anything and didn't want to return the money, and he went to defend his girlfriend. And the guy was protected by a detective, and the detective was waiting for him in the apartment and shot him to death. It's another case. Anyway, so that's basically what the Justice Committee does.
Yeah. Wow. I mean...
And I worked with the Justice Committee until I moved to Puerto Rico.
Which is where you are permanently now, in Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I live here.
Okay. Okay, so we're neighbors. I'm in the DR.
Okay.
Un día de estos paso por allá. I'll come visit you.
Absolutely. You're welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Vicente, before we leave our drum circle, I want to give you an opportunity to, share your message for all of those who are listening about, what you believe still needs to be done and, how can we continue to carry on the legacy of the work that you all have done as part of the Young Lords for our community and continue to do?
Okay. How much time do I have? There's a couple of things I want to say.
I want you to speak your truth. So you take your time.
Okay. Look. Whether the Young Lords existed and no longer exist, I have continued to do revolutionary work. I respect people that were members of the Young Lords and walked away and carried on with their lives. I don't believe that the commitment to bring about a better world, to create a new society, is something that you walk away from. If you make a commitment to it, you make a commitment to it for life. And that's how I try to live my life. I respect people's rights to walk away, but I believe they're wrong.
Yeah.
Right now, I've been living in Puerto Rico for 11 years. Been involved in a number of issues. Presently, I am involved in a campaign against the electrical company because Puerto Rico owned Energía Eléctrica, the company that provided electricity here in Puerto Rico. Who people call him the governor But let me clarify something. Puerto Rico has never had a governor.
Yeah.
Puerto Rico has colonial administrators because the governing of Puerto Rico happens in Washington, D.C.
Yes, yes.
Okay. The so-called governor, the colonial administrator, gave away the electrical company to a private corporation called Luma. And they've been in control of the company now for 13 months. They took over June 1st. So 14 months. They have raised the bill for the electricity 7 times. They have had and continue to have multiple shutoffs of electricity across the island. People, the Puerto Rican people, are being ripped up by this company. And it's an effort promoted by the so-called governor to privatize, to give away Puerto Rico.
Yeah.
So I'm involved in that campaign right now. I think that people need to love humanity. People need to listen to humanity. Okay? What their needs are. People need to work with people. And one of the problems that I see in recent times is that a lot of people depend on electronic media. Facebook, Twitter, this, that, and the other. And while it is true, and I actually use Facebook, while it is true that you can reach a lot of people, that you can provide a lot of people with information, it is not true that we can organize people. Organizing requires the interaction between us and people. We need to be able to respectfully inform, to respectfully educate, to have interactions. We need to be able to listen to people. And that doesn't happen in electronic media. So I'm suggesting that people, need to use electronic media, but people need to go back to one-on-one organizing. We need to go and talk with people. We need to go back to knocking on doors. If we can't do that, we need to make telephone calls and have conversations with people, listen to people, as well as inform, educate, and organize and mobilize.
Right. Yeah, that's how you form relationships.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, we had an action here yesterday. We took over a water tower and put up banners and flags against Luma. That wasn't done by texting or, Facebooking or Twittering. That was done by talking to people. with people.
Yeah.
And we need to go back to that. That's my
Thank you.
message.
Yeah. No, thank you. I appreciate that. It's about, you know, that personal connection, really understanding where people are at, what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and establishing that connection, right? In order to change minds, change attitudes, and change systems completely, or dismantle them if they don't work, right? So I really appreciate that. I appreciate that you took the time to join our circle today. Thank you so very much. Definitely learned a lot, and continue to be inspired by you and all of that you have done and continue to do, and I'm sure our listeners too. To all of you that are listening, I want to leave you with an African proverb that I am very fond of, and that is that youth can walk faster, but the elder knows the road. So let's engage our elders. Let's learn our history so that we can shape a healthy future for ourselves and future generations. Thanks so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Vicente.